At the county auction, everyone fought over the biggest, healthiest ducks except Emma. She quietly chose the weakest flock, birds so thin the auctioneer joked they weren't worth hauling home. The crowd laughed, convinced she had just wasted every dollar she had. Emma never tried to defend herself. She simply loaded the ducks into her trailer and drove away. 3 years later, those same farmers stood in line before sunrise, hoping to buy just one pair of ducklings from her farm. But what made the weakest ducks at the auction produce the most sought-after ducklings in the county? Let's go back to the day everyone thought Emma had made the worst decision of her life. Emma Foster had only one goal when she drove to the county livestock auction that Saturday morning. She needed a small flock of ducks. Not dozens. Just enough to help diversify her struggling family farm. For 2 years, she had relied on selling vegetables and fresh eggs at the local market. It was honest work, but every season seemed to bring a new setback. Too much rain. Feed prices climbing. Equipment breaking down at the worst possible time. She had saved every extra dollar she could, hoping this auction might offer an affordable opportunity. Instead, she watched healthy ducks sell far beyond her budget. Strong birds with bright feathers and heavy bodies drew enthusiastic bidding. Farmers raised their cards without hesitation. Emma folded the list in her pocket. "I guess this isn't my day," she whispered. As she turned to leave, she noticed a small pen tucked behind the larger auction ring. Nearly 50 ducks stood crowded together. Their feathers looked rough. Many were noticeably thinner than the others. A few kept close to the corners instead of competing for feed. The auctioneer caught her looking. "Those came from an estate sale," he explained. "The owner passed away last winter. No one really knows how long they've been getting by with the bare minimum." Emma walked closer. The ducks weren't injured. They weren't sick. They simply looked neglected. While other buyers judged them by their appearance, Emma noticed something different. Even the smallest ducks stayed close together. The older hens gently nudged the younger ones toward the feed tray instead of pushing them away. When one frightened duck wandered toward the fence, another quietly followed beside it. It wasn't something most people would notice, but Emma did. Behind her, laughter broke out. "You're not thinking about buying those, are you?" Another farmer grinned. "You'll spend more feeding them than they're worth." Even the auctioneer smiled politely. "I can lower the starting price if you want." Emma looked at the flock once more. She couldn't explain why, but something about the way they behaved felt different. They weren't fighting. They weren't panicking. Despite everything they'd been through, they stayed together. She slowly raised her bidding card. The crowd laughed louder than before. "She's buying the weakest ducks here." Emma ignored every comment. A few minutes later, she signed the paperwork and opened the trailer gate. As the ducks carefully stepped inside, she noticed they didn't rush or scatter. They followed one another calmly, almost as if they trusted the flock more than their surroundings. Driving home, Emma glanced into the rearview mirror. Everyone at the auction had seen weak ducks. She wasn't so sure. For reasons she couldn't yet explain, she felt she had brought home something far more valuable than anyone else had recognized. Emma spent the rest of the afternoon preparing an old chicken shed that had been sitting empty for years. She spread fresh straw across the floor, scrubbed every water pan, and repaired a broken section of fencing behind the barn. The ducks watched quietly from the trailer until everything was ready. When she finally opened the gate, they stepped out one by one. There was no frantic running, no pushing, no loud squawking. They stayed close together, moving almost like a single family. Emma noticed something unusual almost immediately. The strongest ducks never rushed toward the feed. Instead, they paused. Several smaller ducks slipped past them first. Only after the younger birds had eaten did the larger ones begin pecking at the grain. Emma frowned. "I've never seen that before." The following morning confirmed it wasn't a coincidence. As she carried fresh feed into the pen, she expected the usual chaos that came with hungry poultry. Instead, the flock gathered calmly around the trough. There was very little fighting. No duck chased another away. Even when one small duck stumbled into the middle of the group, the others simply stepped aside. Later that week, her neighbor, Martha Jenkins, stopped by with a basket of tomatoes. "So," Martha asked with a smile, "how are your auction bargains doing?" Emma laughed. They're eating well. I'll admit, I expected worse. Martha leaned against the fence, watching the flock. They're awfully quiet. They are. And look at that. One mother duck had discovered a patch of insects near the pond. Instead of eating everything herself, she gave a soft series of calls. Within seconds, several younger ducks hurried over. The older ducks stepped back, letting them feed first. Martha raised an eyebrow. That's unusual. Emma nodded. I've been noticing little things like that all week. Neither woman thought much of it. After all, ducks were ducks. At least, that's what everyone believed. As summer approached, the flock regained weight. Their feathers became smooth and bright. The weak birds from the auction slowly disappeared, replaced by healthy ducks wandering confidently across the pasture. Yet the strange behavior never changed. They rarely fought. They stayed close together. The older birds constantly seemed to watch over the younger ones. Emma found herself spending less time worrying about whether they would survive, and more time simply sitting beside the pasture, quietly observing. She began carrying a small notebook in her pocket, not to record feed costs or egg production. Instead, she wrote down behaviors. Which ducks shared food? Which mothers stayed with their ducklings the longest? Which families remained together long after the ducklings had grown? She didn't realize it then, but those simple observations, not the ducks themselves, would eventually answer the question that farmers from across the state would travel hundreds of miles to ask. By early autumn, the ducks had fully recovered. No one passing the farm would have guessed they were the same flock that had stood forgotten in the back corner of an auction yard only a few months earlier. They were healthy, strong, alert. Yet what fascinated Emma most had nothing to do with their appearance. It was the way they cared for one another. The following spring brought the flock's first hatching season. Emma expected the usual challenges every duck keeper talked about. Ducklings wandering away, mother ducks abandoning weak chicks, competition between hens. Instead, she witnessed something she had never seen before. One morning, she found a duck leading 8 ducklings toward the pond. A tiny duckling stumbled behind, unable to keep up. Before Emma could step in, another mother duck walked over, gently nudged the little duckling back toward the group, then waited until it caught up before returning to her own family. Emma stood silently beside the fence. That's strange. Over the next several weeks, similar moments happened again and again. If one mother wandered too far from the nest, another quietly stayed nearby. When a young duckling became separated, it was rarely alone for more than a few moments before another adult duck guided it back. Even feeding time looked different. The mother ducks never rushed to the grain first. They called softly. The ducklings ate. Only then did the adults begin feeding themselves. Emma reached for the notebook she now carried everywhere. Instead of writing down egg numbers, she filled page after page with simple observations. April 18, 3 hens shared 1 brood without fighting. April 26, no ducklings lost during first pond outing. May 3, mothers waited until ducklings finished eating. Weeks turned into months. Then Emma noticed another pattern. Almost every duckling survived. She checked her notes twice. Out of 43 ducklings hatched that season, only 1 had been lost during a violent storm. The following afternoon, her veterinarian, Dr. Alan Brooks, stopped by to vaccinate a neighbor's goats and decided to visit Emma afterward. She casually mentioned the numbers. Alan frowned. How many survived? 42. He looked surprised. Out of 43. Emma nodded. I've written everything down. Alan quietly examined several of the ducks before walking around the pasture. Finally, he looked back at Emma. I don't think your flock is special because they're stronger. He paused. I think they're raising stronger ducklings. Emma glanced across the pasture where several mother ducks rested while their ducklings explored nearby. You mean they're better mothers? Alan smiled. I think they may be. Emma didn't realize it yet, but that simple observation would soon spread from one neighboring farm to another. Before long, people wouldn't be asking about her eggs or her feed. They would all come asking the same question. Would you sell us a pair of your ducks? The first person to ask about Emma's ducks wasn't a researcher. It wasn't a veterinarian. It was her neighbor, Martha Jenkins. One afternoon, nearly a year after the auction, Martha pulled into Emma's driveway carrying an empty poultry crate. "I need a favor," she admitted. Emma smiled. "What happened?" "My ducklings." She sighed. "Every spring I lose more than I'd like. Some mothers ignore them. Some wander off. I've tried everything." She looked toward Emma's pasture, where several ducklings followed their mothers through the grass. "I've been watching yours. They stay together." Emma nodded. "I've noticed that too." Martha hesitated before asking, "Would you sell me one breeding pair?" Emma agreed, choosing a healthy young drake and a calm hen that had shown exceptional care during the previous nesting season. "I don't know if they'll make any difference," she said. "They're just ducks." Martha laughed. "We'll find out." Months passed. Harvest season arrived, and Emma nearly forgot about the conversation. Then one chilly October morning, Martha returned. This time she wasn't carrying an empty crate. She was carrying a pie. "I owe you this," she said with a grin. Emma looked puzzled. "For what?" "My ducklings." Martha explained that she had raised nearly 30 that season. Only one had been lost, and that was after a hawk attack. The mothers never left them alone. They called them before eating. They even gathered them together whenever it rained. Emma listened carefully. "That's exactly what mine do." Martha nodded. "I know. I thought it was just your farm." It wasn't. Emma reached for her notebook. Instead of writing only what happened on her own farm, she created a new section, reports from other farms. She carefully recorded Martha's observations. Duckling survival, mothering behavior, growth temperament. A few weeks later, another neighbor stopped by. He had heard about Martha's results and wanted 2 breeding pairs. Then another farmer asked. Then another. None of them talked about egg production. None asked how quickly the ducks gained weight. They all wanted the same thing. "Do your ducks really take care of their young like everyone says?" Emma always gave the same answer. "I can't promise they'll solve every problem. I can only tell you what I've seen." That honesty made people trust her even more. By the end of the following spring, there was a waiting list for her ducklings. Not because Emma had advertised them, not because anyone claimed they were a miracle breed, but because one farmer's experience had quietly become another farmer's confidence. Without realizing it, Emma had discovered something every farming community valued. Good results spread from neighbor to neighbor much faster than any advertisement ever could. Emma never planned to sell breeding ducks. At first, she simply wanted enough healthy birds to keep her small farm going. But after Martha's success, word spread quietly through the county. Not through advertisements. Not through social media. It traveled the old-fashioned way. One farmer told another. Then another. Soon strangers began stopping at Emma's gate. Some drove only a few miles. Others traveled from neighboring counties after hearing the same story. "They say your ducks raise almost every duckling." Emma always smiled before answering. "They raise them well, but they still need good farmers." One Saturday morning, a young couple arrived with 2 small children. They had recently bought 10 acres and hoped to start a homestead. "We're not looking for the biggest ducks," the husband explained. "We're looking for birds our kids can learn with." Emma walked them through the pasture instead of taking them straight to the breeding pens. She pointed toward a mother duck leading her brood through the grass. "Watch for a minute." The family stood quietly. Whenever one duckling wandered too far away, the mother gave a soft call. The duckling immediately hurried back. A few minutes later, another hen joined them with her own brood. There was no fighting, no chasing. The ducklings mixed together peacefully before returning to their own mothers. The little girl tugged on her father's sleeve. "They're helping each other." Emma smiled. "They do that a lot." Before leaving, the family purchased just one breeding pair. Emma handed them a folder. Inside were simple notes. How to prepare a nesting area. When not to disturb a mother duck. Why patience mattered more than constant checking. "I include this with every pair," Emma explained. "The ducks already know what they're doing." Our job is not to make it harder. By the end of the year, Emma noticed something remarkable. Nearly every customer who bought a breeding pair returned, not because they wanted a refund, because they wanted another pair. Many also brought photographs. Children holding healthy ducklings, families standing proudly beside small backyard ponds, handwritten letters describing successful hatches. Emma pinned every letter to a bulletin board inside the barn. She called it the Wall of New Beginnings. Whenever a visitor asked why people were willing to wait months for her ducklings, Emma simply pointed toward the wall. "It isn't my opinion that matters," she said. "It's theirs." Looking across dozens of photographs from farms she had never visited, Emma realized her ducks were doing far more than improving one small farm. One careful mother duck at a time, they were quietly changing the way countless other families experience raising ducks for the very first time. As the waiting list continued to grow, Emma noticed something that surprised her even more than the demand itself. Many customers weren't asking how many eggs the ducks laid. They weren't asking how quickly the ducklings grew. Instead, they all seemed to ask the same question. "How do you get the mothers to care for their ducklings like that?" Emma always smiled before answering. "I don't. They teach them." Most visitors looked confused. One afternoon, a local high school agriculture teacher brought a group of students to the farm. Emma led them to a quiet corner of the pasture where several hens were resting with newly hatched ducklings. "No talking for a minute," she whispered. "Just watch." The students stood silently. One duckling wandered several feet away while chasing a grasshopper. Before Emma could point it out, the mother gave a soft, gentle call. The tiny duckling immediately turned around and hurried back. A few minutes later, another brood crossed the pasture. Instead of fighting over space, the two hens calmly stepped around one another, each quietly gathering her own ducklings before continuing on. One student looked amazed. "They're not competing." Emma nodded. "They're focused on protecting what matters." After the students left, Emma opened the notebook she had carried for years. She compared the records from the previous spring with the ones she had collected that season. The same family lines appeared again and again. The calmest hens consistently raised the healthiest broods. The most attentive mothers rarely lost ducklings. Still, Emma refused to rush to a conclusion. One good season isn't enough, she quietly told herself. So she waited. Another year passed. Another hatching season came and went. When she compared the records again, the pattern remained almost unchanged. The same hens, the same families, the same remarkable mothering behavior. Only then did Emma make a decision. Beginning the following spring, she would select breeding birds using one additional standard. Not just health, not just body condition, but proven mothering ability over multiple seasons. Some neighboring farmers questioned her decision. "You can't breed for something like that," one man insisted. Emma smiled. "Maybe not perfectly, but I can choose birds that have shown me the same behavior year after year." The next spring confirmed she had made the right choice. Letters began arriving once again. "Our new hen never left her ducklings. We've never had such a calm brood. Our survival rate is better than ever." Emma pinned every letter beside the others on the barn wall. Looking at them, she realized something important. She hadn't discovered a shortcut. She had simply learned that the qualities most people overlooked were often the ones worth preserving. Sometimes, the greatest improvements didn't come from changing everything. They came from patiently noticing what had quietly been working all along. On the third anniversary of the auction, Emma unlocked her gate before sunrise and found a line of pickup trucks already waiting along the road. Several drivers were the same farmers who had laughed when she loaded the neglected flock into her trailer. Now they were hoping to purchase just one breeding pair descended from those very ducks. Emma didn't remind them of what they had said. She simply greeted each family, asked about their farm, and explained how long they might need to wait. No one complained. The birds, once dismissed as too weak to haul home, had become the most sought-after breeding ducks in the county. By the fourth year, Emma's waiting list had grown longer than she had ever expected. Some families waited 6 months. Others were willing to wait nearly a year for a single breeding pair. Neighbors often asked the same question. "Why don't you hatch more ducks?" The answer seemed obvious. She had enough land. Demand continued to grow. Expanding the operation could easily double her income. One evening, Martha sat beside Emma on the farmhouse porch, watching the ducks settle near the pond. "You've earned this opportunity," Martha said. "Most people would have built another barn by now." Emma smiled. "I've thought about it. So, why haven't you?" Emma watched one mother duck quietly gather her ducklings before the sun disappeared. "Because I don't want to become so busy producing more ducks that I stop paying attention to why people wanted them in the first place." A few weeks later, Ben Harris arrived at the farm. Ben wasn't a large commercial breeder. He owned a respected regional hatchery that supplied ducklings to feed stores and family farms throughout 3 neighboring counties. "I've heard your name for almost a year," he admitted. "Every customer who talks about calm, dependable mother ducks eventually mentions this farm." After touring the pasture, Ben shared an idea. "What if we worked together?" Emma listened. "I could purchase every duckling you hatch each spring. My hatchery would handle the waiting list. You'd spend less time selling and more time breeding." It was a reasonable offer. There were no complicated contracts, no pressure, just a business proposal that could make Emma's life much easier. She asked him one question. "If families call looking for just one breeding pair, will they still have that chance?" Ben hesitated. "Honestly, most of my orders come from larger farms." Emma nodded. She had expected that answer. The next morning, she called Ben. "I'm grateful for the offer, but I'd rather know where my ducks are going. I've watched too many first-time farmers succeed with just one pair. I don't want those families pushed aside." Ben respected her decision. Several months later, he returned, not to negotiate, but simply to visit. As they watched a group of ducklings follow their mothers across the pasture, he smiled. "I finally understand." Emma looked at him. "I thought your business was selling ducklings," Ben said. "But it isn't. It's helping people become confident enough that they won't need as much help next year." Emma laughed softly. "I suppose that's true." Ben extended his hand. "I still can't buy your entire hatch, but I'll keep sending people who are ready to learn." From that day forward, Ben became one of Emma's strongest supporters. Whenever customers visited his hatchery looking for something more than just productive birds, he pointed them toward Emma's small farm. That recommendation would quietly introduce hundreds of new families to the lesson Emma had been teaching all along, that the best flocks were built with patience long before they were built with numbers. Emma had never counted how many ducklings she sold. She did, however, keep every letter her customers mailed back. One rainy afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table reading through them again. Some were only a few handwritten lines. Others stretched across several pages. One came from a retired couple in Kentucky. "Our grandchildren wake up before sunrise just to check on the ducklings. We've never seen mother ducks this calm." Another arrived from a young veteran who had recently started a homestead. "Your notes gave me confidence when I thought I was doing everything wrong. The ducks seemed to know what to do long before I did." Emma smiled as she folded the letters back into their envelopes. They weren't just updates. They were stories. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. On the same Saturday morning, 3 different families arrived at the farm. None of them had come to buy ducks. They simply wanted to show Emma photographs of their first successful hatches and ask a few questions before the next breeding season. While waiting for Emma, the families naturally began talking to one another. One shared how they built safer nesting boxes. Another explained a simple way to keep ducklings dry during heavy spring rains. Before long, they were exchanging phone numbers and promising to stay in touch. Emma watched quietly from the porch. She realized they were learning just as much from one another as they were from her. After everyone left, Martha turned to Emma with a smile. "You know what happened today?" Emma shrugged. "People talked." Martha laughed. "They did more than that. They built friendships." She paused before adding, "Why don't you invite everyone back next spring?" Emma looked surprised. "For what?" "For a day with no buying, no selling. Just families sharing what they've learned." The idea stayed with Emma all winter. When spring arrived, she mailed simple, handwritten invitations to every customer who had purchased breeding ducks during the previous 2 years. There were no sponsors, no admission fee, no schedule, just one sentence. Bring your stories, your questions, and maybe a pie to share. To Emma's surprise, nearly 30 families came. Children chased ducklings across the grass. Experienced farmers answered beginners' questions. Nobody competed. Nobody tried to prove they knew more. As the afternoon came to an end, Daniel Morris from the County Extension Office quietly smiled. I've attended farming conferences for 20 years. I've never seen people learn this much without standing in a classroom. Emma looked around at the laughter, the conversations, and the photographs being exchanged. The ducks had brought everyone together. But kindness, patience, and shared experience were what made them return. Without planning it, her little farm had become more than a place that sold good ducklings. It had become a place where good neighbors quietly helped one another grow. By the 5th year, Emma realized something unusual. She had stopped spending money on advertising altogether. In fact, she had never really advertised in the first place. Every customer came because someone else had quietly recommended her farm. Talk to Emma. She'll answer your questions. Her ducks are good, but she'll also teach you how to raise them. That reputation spread farther than Emma ever expected. One Saturday morning, 3 pickup trucks arrived within half an hour. The families had never met each other. One had driven from Ohio, another from Tennessee. The third had traveled nearly 6 hours from Missouri. As they waited for Emma to finish helping another customer, they naturally began talking. What brought you here? One man asked. My neighbor. He said these ducks raise ducklings better than any flock he's owned. The second farmer smiled. My cousin told me the same thing. The woman from Missouri laughed. I've never even met either of you. I heard about this farm from a veterinarian. Emma overheard the conversation and couldn't help smiling. Not one of them mentioned an advertisement. Not one of them had seen a brochure. They had all arrived because someone they trusted had spoken about her farm. After showing the visitors around the pasture, Emma gathered them beneath the shade of an old maple tree. Before discussing prices, she asked each family the same question. What do you hope these ducks will do for your farm? One wanted calmer breeding birds. Another hoped to introduce ducks to help control insects in orchards. The third simply wanted a flock their grandchildren could safely care for. Emma nodded. Then don't try to make your farms look like mine. The visitors looked confused. She continued, learn from these ducks, but let them adapt to your land. Every farm is different. The advice surprised them. Most breeders proudly explained why their methods were the best. Emma preferred helping people find what worked for their own farms. Before leaving, each family purchased only a single breeding pair. One man apologized. I wish I could buy more. Emma smiled. I'd rather see one pair succeed than 10 pairs struggle. Several months later, photographs began arriving once again. Children collecting eggs before school. Ducklings following their mothers through apple orchards. Small ponds filled with healthy young birds. Emma pinned every new picture beside the older ones until nearly an entire wall of the barn was covered. Standing there one evening, Martha quietly looked around. You know, she said, people don't recommend this farm because you sell ducks. Emma looked at the photographs. Why do they recommend it? Martha smiled. Because when they leave here, they believe they can become better farmers. Emma looked across the pasture as the evening sun settled behind the trees. For her, there was no greater compliment than that. Every spring, Emma invited families who had purchased ducks from her farm to return for what she simply called Duck Day. There were no admission tickets, no sales booths, no speeches, just neighbors, homemade food, children running through the pasture, and dozens of ducks quietly going about their day. People often expected Emma to spend the afternoon talking about breeding techniques. Instead, she usually handed visitors a small bucket of feed and encouraged them to sit by the pond. Don't rush, she would say. Just watch. At first, most people saw nothing unusual. The ducks swam. The ducklings followed behind. Everything looked ordinary. But after a few minutes, the small details became impossible to ignore. When one duckling wandered too far from the group, its mother didn't panic. She gave one soft call. The little duck immediately turned around. If another brood happened to cross their path, neither mother became aggressive. Each calmly guided her own ducklings without fighting over space. A father visiting with his two sons watched quietly for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, his youngest boy asked, "Dad, why aren't they pushing each other away?" His father smiled. "I think they're busy doing something more important." Emma overheard the conversation and walked over. Exactly. The best mothers don't spend all their time chasing others away. They spend it raising the ones they're responsible for. The father nodded thoughtfully. "I guess that lesson works outside the duck pond, too." By late afternoon, visitors gathered beneath the large oak tree for coffee and pie. No one talked much about buying more ducks. Instead, they exchanged ideas. One family explained how they built safer nesting shelters. Another described using portable fencing to protect ducklings from predators. Someone else shared a simple water system that saved hours of work every week. Emma listened far more than she spoke. That had always been her way. As the gathering came to an end, Daniel Morris, the county extension agent, quietly stood and looked around at the families preparing to leave. "You know," he said, "I visit farms almost every day. I've seen people buy equipment. I've seen them buy better animals. But I've rarely seen a place where people leave with more confidence than when they arrived." The group fell silent. Emma looked across the pasture where children laughed as ducklings hurried behind their mothers. She realized Daniel was right. The ducks had brought everyone together, but what kept them coming back wasn't the ducks themselves. It was the opportunity to learn from one another. Without anyone planning it, her little farm had quietly become a place where better farmers and stronger neighbors were being raised together. As the years passed, Emma noticed something she had never expected. People rarely called to ask, "How much do your ducklings cost?" Instead, they usually asked, "When will the next hatch be ready?" For many families, the waiting mattered far less than knowing they would eventually have a chance. Emma never shortened her breeding season to satisfy demand. Every spring, she selected only a small number of hens that had consistently demonstrated calm, dependable mothering over several years. If a hen abandoned her nest one season after years of excellent care, Emma didn't immediately remove her from the breeding program. She watched another season. Only after repeated patterns did she make a decision. "Every good mother deserves another chance," she often said. But every breeding decision deserves patience. One warm afternoon in early summer, a familiar pickup truck rolled into the driveway. Emma immediately recognized it. It belonged to Ben Harris, the hatchery owner who had once offered to purchase every duckling she could produce. This time, he wasn't alone. A young boy, no older than 10, climbed out of the passenger seat carrying a small photo album. Ben smiled. "I thought you should see something." They sat together beneath the old oak tree while the boy carefully opened the album. The first picture showed two nervous ducks standing beside a newly finished pond. Emma laughed. "I remember those two." The next photograph showed tiny ducklings following their mother through fresh grass. Then came another. Children scattering feed beside a peaceful flock. Finally, the last page revealed 3 generations of Ben's family standing together around nearly 40 healthy ducks. "My grandson named almost every one of them," Ben said with a grin. The boy proudly nodded. "They all come when Grandma calls." Emma laughed. "I believe they probably do." Ben grew quiet for a moment. "I came here years ago hoping to buy as many ducks as possible. I thought success meant having the biggest flock." He looked toward the pasture where another brood quietly followed its mother. "I was wrong." Emma listened without interrupting. "The best thing those ducks produced wasn't more ducklings. They changed the way our family farms together." The boy gently closed the photo album. "My grandpa says we watch the ducks before we make decisions." Emma smiled. "That's good advice." As Ben prepared to leave, he handed Emma one final photograph. It wasn't a picture of ducks. It showed 3 generations sitting together beside the pond at sunset. On the back, Ben had written a single sentence: "Thank you for reminding us that the best farms grow families first." Emma pinned the photograph beside the hundreds of letters already covering the barn wall. Looking at them, she realized something beautiful. The ducklings people waited months to receive had never been the greatest gift her farm offered. They were simply the beginning of stories that continued long after the ducks left her gate. Somehow that meant more to Emma than any waiting list ever could. On the 6th anniversary of the auction, Emma unlocked the gate before sunrise, just as she had every morning since bringing the neglected ducks home. The farm was quiet. The pond reflected the first light of day. Across the pasture, several generations of ducks wandered calmly through the grass. Some were descendants of the original flock. A few of the oldest hens still walked slowly behind them, no longer raising ducklings themselves, but remaining close, just as they always had. Later that morning, families began arriving for the annual Duck Day gathering. Children hurried toward the pond. Parents greeted old friends. Many of the visitors had first met one another on Emma's farm years earlier. Near the entrance stood a large framed photograph from the livestock auction. It showed the original flock standing inside the neglected pen where no one had wanted them. Beside the picture, Emma had placed a small wooden sign. This is where everyone thought the story would end. People stopped to read it before quietly walking toward the pasture. That afternoon, the county auctioneer who had sold Emma the flock unexpectedly arrived. He stood silently in front of the photograph for several minutes. When Emma greeted him, he smiled with a hint of embarrassment. "I remember that day." "So do I," Emma replied. He chuckled. "I told everyone those ducks weren't worth hauling home." Emma laughed. "You weren't the only one." The auctioneer looked across the pasture where children were watching ducklings follow their mothers. "I've been thinking about that day for years. We all laughed because we thought you saw something valuable in weak ducks." He shook his head gently. "But that wasn't what you saw at all." Emma remained quiet. "You saw something we never bothered to notice." She looked toward the flock. "I only gave them a chance." The auctioneer nodded, and they showed everyone else what they were capable of. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. I don't think people come here because your ducks are different." Emma smiled. "Why do you think they come?" He looked around at the families talking together beneath the old oak tree. "They come because you reminded us that patience still has a place in farming." As the last visitors headed home that evening, Emma walked slowly through the pasture. The original ducks had never become the biggest. They had never laid the most eggs. They had never broken any records. Yet they had quietly accomplished something far more meaningful. They taught hundreds of families that careful observation, kindness, and patience could shape a flock more effectively than rushing for bigger numbers. Years earlier, people had laughed because Emma chose the weakest ducks at the auction. Looking across the peaceful pasture, she finally understood the truth. They had never been laughing at the ducks. They had been laughing at the idea that compassion could become the strongest foundation for a successful farm. In the end, that simple idea was exactly what everyone came home hoping to learn. If Emma's story reminded you that the qualities others overlook may be the ones most worth preserving, share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have taken a chance on the weakest flock at the auction? If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories about hardworking farmers, second chances, and unexpected success. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the strongest future begins with someone patient enough to notice value where everyone else sees weakness.